White House shakeup. A top aide to the president is out as Donald Trump considers an overhaul in the West Wing. Terror in the Philippines. ISIS targets civilians in the city of Marawi, where hundreds are being held hostage, including a Catholic priest. Civil dialogue.
Somebody has to step up and say, okay, enough. Let's do this a different way. People have to start talking to each other.
After a scuffle in the Texas State House, some journalists are calling for a return to civility. Pope Francis, the innovator. The Holy Father gets down to business with workers in Genoa, Italy. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, May 30th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A top White House communications staffer resigns as President Donald Trump considers a major staff overhaul. Michael Dubke was President Trump's communications director. His departure comes as aides say the president has grown increasingly frustrated by allegations of Russian meddling in the 2016 election. Dubke's last day has not been set. President Trump is back from his historic 9-day trip overseas and from the long Memorial Day weekend where he honored our nation's fallen at Arlington Cemetery. His press secretary, Sean Spicer, also returned to the podium today in the briefing room. Correspondent Mark Irons was there and joins us now from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. It was a very brief briefing and it ended abruptly. Sean Spicer described President Trump's first foreign trip as a success. He then took questions about White House advisor Jared Kushner and his alleged communications with the Russians, but things got heated when Spicer was asked about the definition of fake news.
The reason that the president is frustrated is because there's a perpetuation of false narratives, a use of unnamed sources over and over again about things that are happening that don't ultimately happen, and I think that is troubling.
Another topic that came up was the shakeup within the president's communications staff. Sean Spicer said the president is pleased with the work of his staff, but said the best messenger is the president himself. Lauren.
Mark Irons, correspondent, reporting from the White House. Thank you, Mark. President Trump's Office of Management and Budget has drafted a rule aimed at rolling back a key requirement of Obamacare, the mandate that religious employers like EWTN provide birth control coverage in their health care plans. Advocates of religious freedom say this is very encouraging.
What we need now is for two things to happen. The first is a fix to the regulations, the things that are threatening to fine EWTN and the Little Sisters of the Poor and these other religious groups. The other thing that we need is to wrap up these cases in court. We want to make sure that we have court orders protecting all these religious groups so they're not under threat from the HHS mandate again.
Beckett is taking steps to make sure religious groups are protected not just today, but into the future. Texas lawmakers threaten to shoot their colleagues. A Montana politician allegedly body slams a reporter. Civility in American politics, where have you been? Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reports from Capitol Hill. Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Lawmakers here at the U.S. Capitol trade jabs on a daily basis and rarely reach across the aisle. But what happened in Texas yesterday shows us just how polarized politics are right now. A scuffle on the floor of the Texas State House yesterday. On his Facebook page, Republican Matt Rinaldi says a Democrat threatened his life. The fight began over a new law cracking down on so-called sanctuary cities.
Texas has now banned sanctuary cities.
It requires Texas police chiefs and sheriffs to follow federal requests to hold suspects for possible deportation. Protests against the law erupted yesterday in Austin. But that's not the only city in America where politics are getting ugly. Last week, a Montana politician allegedly body slammed a reporter.
I'm sick and tired of you guys. The last time you came in here, you did the same thing.
It's all part of a trend of growing incivility in America, according to the Wall Street Journal's Washington bureau chief, Gerald Seib. He wrote about the issue today.
And I talked to Father Jenkins, the president of Notre Dame, in doing this column, and he made the point that leaders have to step up and do something about it. They have to lead. And so some people have to basically step up and say, this is really not the way we want our democracy to go.
But in the end, Seib says lawmakers often play to their bases and win when they stir up their passions. Voters are the ones who can help change the climate, he says.
People out in the country have to look in the mirror and ask themselves, are they willing to vote to encourage compromise and civil discourse?
That's probably easier said than done, Lauren, but today's political climate is nothing compared to 1804, when Vice President Aaron Burr shot former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton in a duel that would end up taking Hamilton's life.
Correspondent Jason Calvi and history professor on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much, Jason. A Catholic priest taken hostage by ISIS militants in the Philippines begs the country's president to set him free. He says he's being held captive along with 200 other people, including children. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsby has the details from the Filipino embassy in Washington. Good evening, Wyatt.
Lauren, good evening. The Filipino military has launched a campaign to liberate the city where the priest and other Catholics have come under assault. After a week of gun battles, the country's army says they've nearly kicked ISIS out.
After a weekend of intense fighting and military airstrikes, Filipino soldiers say they have retaken control of most of Marawi, a city under siege by ISIS for more than a week.
What we are trying to do right now, and it's a commitment, is to expedite what needs to be done in order to restore law and order.
Hundreds of families, up to 90% of Marawi's people, have fled for their own safety. This woman says hearing the bombing scared her and shook her car like an earthquake. More than 100 militants, troops, and civilians have been killed. In one part of Marawi, neighbors said they fought back against the militants until the army arrived, then kept fighting alongside the troops. This woman says they needed to protect the bridge leading into their village. The army says ISIS had been planning to unleash attacks during the holy month of Ramadan and target churches. Catholics in the Philippines are praying for the captured priest and more than a dozen parishioners seized from the city's cathedral.
Filipino President Rodrigo Duterte has imposed martial law in the city and the surrounding province. He's ordered troops to crush the ISIS militants. Lauren?
Wyatt, what has the U.S. said about the fight against ISIS in the Philippines?
Lauren, the White House voiced support for the country's counterterrorism efforts and condemned the violence against civilians. Press Secretary Sean Spicer says the U.S. is a proud ally of the Philippines and will continue to work alongside them. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsby reporting. Thank you, Wyatt. Former Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega, a one-time U.S. ally ousted by American invasion in 1989, died yesterday. He was 83 years old. Manuel Noriega, a figure whose ambitions and antagonism cost him his American friends, his Panamanian presidency, and his freedom. For almost 2 decades, Noriega was a major player in a small country of critical importance to the U.S., due to its location on the Panama Canal, the strategic and economic waterway between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. There seems to be little doubt that Noriega served American interests and profited handsomely. Noriega claimed he received millions for helping the CIA. U.S. drug agents claimed he also received millions for helping the Medellin cartel, protecting cocaine shipments and laundering cash.
Of course, we later found out that when Manuel made arrest, he made 1 arrest for us and 2 for him, and 1 for us and 5 for him, meaning that he obviously didn't make a lot of arrests and profited handsomely from not making those arrests.
Panamanian soldiers clashed with U.S. troops stationed in the country. By then, that formerly friendly CIA director George H.W. Bush had been elected president and ordered U.S. troops into the country.
The goals of the United States have been to safeguard the lives of Americans, to defend democracy in Panama, to combat drug trafficking, and to protect the integrity of the Panama Canal Treaty.
It cost the lives of about 24 Americans and hundreds, or some even say thousands, of Panamanians. Noriega was the first foreign head of state ever to be convicted in a U.S. court, spending some 20 years in American prisons for drug trafficking and money laundering. He was extradited to France and back to Panama, where he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. Many people in Panama are reacting with indifference to Noriega's death. Doctors, nurses, and patients are going about their business as usual at the hospital where he died. There has been no word on funeral plans. Iraqi officials raised the death toll from a nighttime bombing outside an ice cream parlor to 15. Closed-circuit video in Baghdad shows a busy downtown avenue with cars driving down the street when a massive blast strikes. The Islamic State is claiming responsibility for the attack. It came just days into the holy month of Ramadan, when Muslims fast during daylight hours. After sundown, families break their fast. Baghdad's restaurants and cafes fill up quickly. Ramadan is often marked by an increase in violence in Iraq. Egypt removes the security chief of a province south of Cairo, where Islamic State militants last week killed 29 Christians. The victims there were traveling by bus to a remote monastery in the desert. It was the fourth assault targeting Christians since December. Attacks that have been claimed by ISIS and that have killed more than 100 people in all. ISIS has vowed to step up the attacks on Coptic Christians, who account for about 10% of Egypt's population. Soldiers in South Sudan accused of a violent attack on foreign workers are now on trial. 12 of the soldiers arrived in court today. They're accused of rape, torture, killing, and looting in a 2016 assault. 5 foreigners are being ganged, raped. 1 local journalist was shot in the head and killed as others were forced to watch. The soldiers could face up to 14 years in prison or a death sentence if found guilty of murder. And the Vatican today confirms Pope Francis will not visit South Sudan in 2017. The Holy Father had expressed his desire to travel there earlier this year. But security in the nation is precarious. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, why did Pope Francis want to go to South Sudan?
Lauren, after 3 years of civil war, about 5.5 million people are food insecure and risk death in the coming months. Famine has been declared there. The UN calling the resulting refugee crisis, people fleeing the violence in South Sudan, the fastest growing refugee crisis on the planet right now, with 1.6 million people already having left the country to take refuge in the surrounding country. So the news from there each day gets worse and worse. Pope Francis hoping to visit there, hoping to bring some comfort, some relief, some pastoral support to lift their spirits.
How's the church helping people in South Sudan?
Lauren, it's in some of these remote places where food aid is not able to arrive through government channels, let's say the UN, for example, but the Catholic Church is there in some of those most hard to reach places. They have stayed there. They have stayed with the people, missionaries exemplarily being on the front lines of these challenges, serving everybody of every faith, trying to bring relief wherever they can. The UN having accused the South Sudanese government from prohibiting humanitarian assistance arriving to those destinations that are most hard hit. So it's the Catholic Church working where it can to bring relief to those who need it.
So the church is there helping. What do you think world leaders can do to help this nation?
Well, if we listen to Pope Francis's appeal back in February, he basically called on everybody. That means you and I, government leaders, to do whatever it is that we can do to allow humanitarian assistance to reach these people. For example, in the U.S., on the part of the U.S. government, at least some of the leaders of the South Sudanese government are being listed as criminals, war criminals, these humanitarian abuses. So they need to continue. It is the hope that they will continue, whatever government you are, or even the European Union or the United Nations, to pressure the leaders of South Sudan to let humanitarian assistance through and hopefully work for peace to bring an end to this horrific civil war. Lauren?
Mary Shovlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, pro-life activist David Daleiden releases videos alleging illegal activity by Planned Parenthood. We're going to tell you how they impact the pro-life movement. Kansas lawmakers approved new requirements for abortion providers. They want the doctors to disclose their credentials, disciplinary record, and malpractice lawsuits to pregnant women. The measure tightens the state's long-standing right-to-know law. Pro-life Governor Sam Brownback is expected to sign it. A California judge has ordered undercover Planned Parenthood videos posted by the lawyers of David Daleiden to be removed from the website. The videos were originally posted on YouTube, were ordered to be taken down. David Daleiden is set to appear in court on June 14th. The judge will consider whether or not to impose contempt charges against Daleiden, the Center for Medical Progress, or his lawyer. Joining us right now, Jeannie Mancini, president of the March for Life. Thank you so much for joining us and for coming on to tell us about what's happening here. First of all, David Daleiden never released these videos.
Right, his lawyers released them. Right, absolutely.
Absolutely. So he didn't, even though I think I might have said that right before we came to break. Second of all, our lawyers have asked us not to show the videos, at least for right now. So I'd like you to describe them to our audience. We have shown them many times on EWTN News Nightly up until this point.
Right, and frankly, it's hard to describe because they're so horrific to watch. I mean, you feel sick to your stomach, but essentially what this is a conference going on of abortionists, and they're laughing about things like little eyeballs falling into their lap, the how sharp a skull is. I mean, it's so horrific.
Right,
it's
that's
hard
enough.
to describe.
I can't even.
Yeah,
I can't even listen to you
say. But what
this.
is important
Right.
is that they're talking about harvesting little hearts, little lungs, little livers, limbs, for quote unquote science.
So how important is it for the pro-life movement to see these videos and that they remain available to the public?
As hard as it is, it's important because it shows the abortion industry for what it is. It shows abortion for what it is, but I'll tell you what else. As we're working to defund Planned Parenthood, it shows Planned Parenthood for what it is. And our nation's taxpayer dollars should not be going towards funding these kinds of things, these criminal activities. You know, again, harvesting little baby parts.
So what I have here, what you have here, is a letter to the Honorable Jeff Sessions. Dear Attorney General Sessions, and this is on your behalf, and Acting Director McKay, we are representing millions of Americans and we strongly support an investigation into fetal tissue transfers involving Planned Parenthood. You just mailed this.
We did. The Obama administration really turned a blind eye to this criminal activity, but we're happy that during the Obama administration, the House and the Senate had committees looking into this, into the criminal activity of this harvesting of baby parts. So we're asking now, rightfully, the Justice Department to take this over, and we expect that they will.
What do you say, though, to people who say that these videos are doctored and they're fake?
Well, that's been proven by a forensic analysis that they aren't doctored at all. So it's just false. You don't take that.
Jeannie Mancini, always great to hear from you. Thank you, President March for Life.
Thanks, Lauren.
Up next, is Google facilitating human trafficking? We'll talk to one group that says yes, and Pope Francis is on the go. What he's saying about business and the economy. Google is under fire for supporting child sex trafficking, for supporting a website about it. A new report shows the company supports efforts by the website Backpage.com to operate like a virtual auction block, and that facilitates the sexual exploitation. I spoke with a leading national advocacy group about the report's key findings. Joining us now is Lisa Thompson, Vice President of Education and Outreach for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Well, we're here to talk about this new report that's come out on how Google's backing of Backpage is protecting child sex trafficking. First of all, tell us what Backpage does.
Backpage is an online website, advertising website, that functions as the modern-day auction block for women and children online.
So people can go there and just say, okay, I want to have sex with a child, and click, there you go.
Yeah, it's as easy as ordering a pizza online. You can shop from the privacy of your home, your office, your cell phone, and pick and choose women and children that you want to buy for sex.
So why is Google lobbying Congress to keep Backpage alive?
Well, in part because of the law that shields Google from any kind of liability should they be held, should somebody want to hold them accountable for something that a third party posts via their website.
So if you buy a faulty bike, it's not Google, and it's been posted on Google, it's not Google's fault.
Right, like Craigslist would be a great example. If you advertise something for sale, it's faulty, you're not allowed to sue Craigslist.
Okay, but it seems a lot different that something is faulty, like a bike, and promoting childhood sex trafficking.
Right. Human beings aren't objects for sale.
Right. Ivanka Trump, President Trump's daughter, had a meeting in Rome with victims of sex trafficking. And there is a lot of White House support for this issue. Tell us what Congress is doing to stop Google and stop Backpage.
Well, Congresswoman Ann Wagner has introduced new legislation that would amend the law that has been shielding Backpage, in which Google has been lobbying against these kinds of efforts. So we're very hopeful that the administration and members of Congress will support Ann Wagner's legislation, the Allow States and Victims of Online Sex Trafficking Act of 2017.
And what would they be able to do? Sue? Or?
Yes, well, the states could actually prosecute Backpage.com, and victims could sue for civil remedies.
You know, in this report, it's just disgusting. A 12-year-old was tasered and forced to work while pregnant with the pimp's daughter. A 15-year-old was sold 150 times. And also in here it says 73% of all suspected child trafficking reports in the U.S. involve Backpage. But isn't this a symptom? Isn't this a symptom of a larger societal issue surrounding sex?
Well, we at the National Center on Sexual Exploitation would argue that we're living in a culture that has very much cheapened sex. And we live in an age where sex is for sale, it's just a commodity, it's a cheap thing. So, of course, a lot of people think that you can buy sex. And so we live in an age where the real problem here is that people are buying sex online, you know, treating people like objects.
All right. Lisa Thompson, Vice President of Education and Outreach for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. Thanks for all of the work you do on behalf of victims.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Pope Francis highlights the struggles of workers that they face during a visit to a troubled steel factory in Genoa, Italy. The Holy Father stressed this weekend that jobs give people a sense of human dignity and denounced those who exploit workers. Thousands of industrial workers came to hear him, many in uniforms, hard hats, and the visit put a focus on the plight of people impacted by years of economic crisis. Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor and senior editor with National Catholic Register, is here. You've written extensively about Pope Francis's view of capitalism, and he's many times accused of being an enemy of capitalism. Is this accurate based on what he says in Genoa? It seems like maybe.
Yeah, well, he's also been accused of being a Marxist, a socialist, and a communist, when in fact he's standing very firmly grounded in traditional Catholic social teaching. He speaks about the importance of business, of good business as essential to a good economy. The key there, of course, being good. And like every other pope before him, John Paul II in particular, he warns that a business that loses sight of the human person becomes what he describes as a faceless economy, a ruthless economy, or as he also put it, an economy that kills.
But that is not the same as being an enemy of capitalism,
Correct.
Is it?
Correct. In 2015, when he was here in the United States, before Congress, he spoke about the important role that business has in lifting people out of poverty. And he's made the point in Genoa of the difference between entrepreneurs and those who are provocateurs, those who enable bad business, what he calls speculators. And he holds up in his speech in Genoa those entrepreneurs who hire people who love their workers and work with them in a relationship to build good business.
To try to make their careers as successful as they humanly possibly can be. Now, tell us what the church teaches about the rights of workers.
Right. Well, we go all the way back to Genesis. God told Adam, till the earth, work the earth. Work, therefore, is a participation in God's creation, God's dignity. It brings with it an innate dignity, and therefore the worker does as well. And that's something that Francis talked about in Genoa with these workers, that you have this dignity. But he adds a great line. He said that without work, you can survive. But if you want to live, you have to have work.
Interesting. And there's also that live to work, work to live mantra that you always hear.
Right. And that relationship, again, between capital and labor, as Leo XIII said, you can't have labor without capital and capital without labor.
There you go. Thank you so much, Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor. And that does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Good night, and God bless.